My dear friends, good morning to all of you once again, if you're falling asleep. Okay. Today we are presented with the Beatitudes. For most of us, as children, we have heard this. We have had it in prayer cards, and most probably we have prayed it ourselves. But there is something quite unique in that, especially living in a culture obsessed with strength and success. Today's readings are a startling reality of the qualities and the behavior that our Lord looks for in his followers. In a political and social atmosphere that we live, showing weakness is often seen as a sense or as a means of weakness. But therefore, when we look at today's readings, we can see God saying, "Happy, blessed are you who are weak, who are persecuted, who are struggling, for you will be blessed." What does it really mean? But before we go much further, I would like to put this reading in its proper context today. And that is, as you know, Jesus is also called the new Moses. When Moses went up Mount Sinai to bring the 10 Commandments, it says he went up the mountain and he brought the 2 tablets written by the finger of God himself down below to the people of Israel who had gathered. And there he taught them the commandments of the Lord. But what is unique in Jesus is he goes up the mountain and he invites his followers up the mountain. And on top of the mountain, he teaches them the new teaching of the gospel. As the Catechism of the Catholic Church says, it is the heart and soul of Jesus' teachings. It captures the very essence of what he's all about. Now, if you take a look at this word happy or blessed, the Greek word is makarios. It is something that for most of us we find quite difficult to understand. Because for us, what happiness means is quite a different thing from what the Lord tells us. We always look for how to be happy and search for the secret of happiness. But what Jesus says in happiness is, if you are sorrowing, if you're being persecuted, then you are happy. But why is that? Because all human heart desires happiness. St. Augustine says our hearts are restless until they rest in you, until you give us the true happiness. Therefore, bear with me as I go through each of today's Beatitudes, the 8 that is presented, and let us reflect together as to what this really means to us. The first is, happy you who are poor in spirit. Now, the word really poor in spirit in Greek means tokos, which means absolute dependence on God. And in that, what he says is, poor in spirit is those who are spiritually has a spiritual hunger for the Lord, because it is there that all our riches lie. So therefore Christ says, happy are the poor in spirit, for theirs is the kingdom of heaven. We are called to be poor spiritually, because it is there that God can fill us. As we heard in today's first reading and the second reading, God exalts the poor, the needy, those who are absolutely destitute, who hunger for God, who depend completely and solely on the providence of God. Then the second one that we are presented is, happy are those who mourn. Now, for most of us, at one time or the other in our lives, we go through immense sadness. We lament the loss of either a loved one, our spouse, our children, or maybe somebody we know. Or we might be sorrowful for the loss of property or whatever that we have, something that we hold dear to us. But one of the things that it speaks of is, as St. Augustine says, is Christ says, if you are profoundly sad, if you are, especially you have lost something that is who, or person who is dear to you, you are blessed. Now the reason for that is actually quite interesting. Pope Benedict XVI of blessed memory says this about those who mourn. He says there are two types of mourners. The first is the kind that has lost all hope. And the second is the one who has hope in their sorrow. And he gives the example of Judas, the one who betrayed Jesus, as a first example of those who have lost hope in mourning. He says, struck with the horror of his own fault, Judas no longer had hope in the Lord, but he was in such despair that he ends his life. We live in a culture where we don't need to lie, where suicide is a very common, prevalent thing. Even a couple of days ago, I heard of a man who had a very comfortable and happy life. He celebrated, it seems, even the Australia Day with a barbecue with his wife, and then in the evening he decided to end his life. What really is, what triggers this hopelessness? What is it that makes people so desperate that they can't see hope? And Christ says, it is only when we have strong faith in the providence of God, we will not lose hope. And the second person, therefore, that Pope Benedict says, the second kind of mourner, is a person, he gives the example of St. Peter. He says, Peter, who have denied Jesus for 3 times, who has denied him, is struck by the gaze of our Lord, and he burst into healing tears that blows upon the soil of his soul and begins anew healing and reparation. And therefore it says it renews his soul, and he goes on to see, even though he has lost all hope, even though he is mourning for what he has done, in the Lord there is newness, there is redemption, and there is forgiveness. And then the next that we are presented is, happy are the meek. Now, the word for meek in Greek is prorus. Now, for those of us looking at ourselves, if we find ourselves meek, in today's society, in today's day and age, is considered a weakness. But what Jesus says is, if we are gentle, if we are meek, if we conquer evil with good, we shall inherit the earth. Because in our culture it says, those who are powerful, those who are evil, those who are ruthless, who know what they want, is the ones who will inherit the earth. But the Lord turns it upside down and says, it is the meek who will truly inherit the earth. Then he goes on to say, happy are those who hunger for righteousness and justice, for they will be satisfied. For most of us, we are called to do what is right, to do right by others and for those who come to us for help. And therefore he says, for those people as such, they shall be satisfied. They shall see righteousness and justice flourish in the earth. And then Jesus says, happy are those who are merciful. Happy are those who forgive, even though that person whom you forgive do not deserve your forgiveness. As the disciples asked Jesus, how many times should I forgive my brother when he has wronged me? He says 70 times 7, unconditionally. So he says, happy are those who are merciful, for they will be blessed. Then the Lord goes on to say, happy the pure of heart, those who avoid compromise, who stand for what is right, for they shall see God face to face. Then he goes on to say, happy are the peacemakers, those who foster peace and unity among ourselves, among society, for they will be called children of God. And then finally he goes on to say, happy are those who are persecuted, who are falsely accused for doing the right thing, or are persecuted for the sake of their faith in the Lord, for theirs shall be the kingdom of heaven. Now, having said that, my dear brothers and sisters, if you reflect on this, all these Beatitudes, these 8 Beatitudes, are eschatological realities, because we have to understand our faith is not a magic pill that takes away all pain and suffering, all distress and sorrow. We have inherited this due to our sinful nature, due to the sin that we as a collective holds. But what the Lord tells us is, if we continue to believe in Him, if we live as He has commanded, we shall inherit eternal, everlasting happiness. Where the book of Revelation says, all tears will be wiped away. There will be no more tears, mourning, or suffering. Therefore, my dear friends, as we reflect this Sunday morning, to reflect, to listen, to contemplate what these means, let us look into our very selves. Let us look as to how we look at happiness. Aristotle says this about what true happiness is. He says, as he starts to judge from the lives of the most leading men of his time, most identify goodness and happiness with pleasure. I think for most of us it is the same. We always seek for pleasure. But Aristotle says, happy will be the man who engages in virtuous actions and in contemplation. Therefore, my dear brothers and sisters, as we gather to reflect, to pray, to contemplate the realities of God, let us ask the Lord to give us the grace to understand each of our life's journeys. Wherever we might be in life, what the Lord tells us is, have hope in the Lord. It is there, it is in that we will always find true happiness. For we are not an aimless people. As St. Paul says in today's second reading, God gives the weak and the despised strength to stand firm. Recently I was listening to a charismatic song, and it goes, I'm not going to sing it, but the words of that in the chorus is something like this. It says, Moses had stage fright, which is he was a stammerer, and David brought a stone to a sword fight. And Jesus picked up 12 men whom society thinks as nobodies and created magic, created a rebellion within the world. Each and every one of us, we might not have much to offer, but in the Beatitudes we are given hope that if the little that we have, God can make use and make it wonderful, make it something great. So let us ask for that grace as we continue in today's Eucharist.